Good morning, Emily. How are you doing today?
Good morning. I'm great. Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm excited to talk with you because you have started a journey here that I think needs to be a part of everything that is growing forward in the way that, we don't know the story. We assume, we read articles about certain people such as Christy, and the thing is, though, is that we don't know the soul of the source.
Yeah, and we assume that everyone had an easier time than we're going through.
Why is that?
It's super important to be.
Why is that?
I don't know. I don't know if it's like a bias that we have towards ourselves, that we think that we're not going to get out of it. And so no one else is going to find it, or no one else is going to see like the positives. We always have this sort of like negative bias towards ourselves. So it's really important to me to be able to tell every part of the story, like the hard part, the medium part, the part you weren't sure you were going to get through, the bad part again, to make sure that people can see themselves when they see these stories of success, that they actually this kind of success is possible for them too.
The podcast is called She Pivots, but yet while I listen to the podcast, I feel like it should be We Pivots. because I can relate with so many of these stories because we're all challenged by different things. But I love the fact that you put the focus on the women because it's happening again. Women are coming out of the COVID lockdown and they're coming out stronger and they need leadership, and it's roles like this that you're talking with that really will help pave that way.
Well, I think it's thank you. First of all, I'm glad to see that you see yourself in the show and that so many people do. I think it's a pretty big, important piece to me to make sure that the variety of stories that we tell have huge diversity, not just in terms of like the actual person's background, or like the industry that they're in, but what I call like the intervening life event, like the thing that happened to them. So, like this week we had Christy Turlington on. Yeah. Obviously hers was being a supermodel, like the supermodel, and having a fairly traumatic birth and then starting a nonprofit after that. But it could be so many things that throw people off. Like I think we tend to think, especially with women, that the thing that's going to change your perspective is having kids. And in my case, it was. But that's so not the thing for everybody. Like we had a woman who grew up in a cult and now is a commercial roofer. Mm-hmm. We have people who were fired for their jobs or went through a lot of personal change. We have people who came out of trans. Like there's so many things that can change your perspective. So we want to make sure that we're covering all of them.
But it all has to start somewhere. Christy Turlington, the one thing that I loved about that was she was so open to talk about what happened in San Francisco, the Bay Area. She goes to Miami. Oh my God, what a living nightmare it was there for their family. She goes back out to California, and then the way that she has to go to Paris in order to make it to New York to get onto Vogue. Everything had to play out exactly the way that it did.
It's so true. I think I love the way that she talks about it, because even that first part of her success, like the supermodel part of her success, like the top line we've all heard was, oh, she was discovered as a teenager. Then in our minds, we kind of fast forward to see her as cover of Vogue, supermodel, walking runways. But actually, she had a couple of years of fits and starts and having to move around to be able to get to even just that supermodel success.
I got really touched. I think what really got me, surrounding Christy even more was when she was talking about how her and her sister went to the, had the pictures taken and stuff like that. But her sister didn't get the opportunity. God, that where my sister or my brother was there with me, but I got to go or I didn't get to go. But I just know that moment so well.
Yeah, there are those moments where, yes, that we can see opportunity for ourselves, but we might need to navigate some interpersonal stuff. Mm-hmm. Like they were teenagers, they were teenage sisters. And her sister, in fact, was the one who was more interested in fashion than she was, which, you can't imagine how that must have weighed on her as she was deciding what her options were moving forward. Clearly she decided to stick with it, but so interesting to hear that like those family dynamics, those sibling dynamics, those interpersonal dynamics, like we're present for her too. Mm-hmm. Again, like we look and we see this massive success that she is, and we think, oh, of course you got discovered as a teenager. I felt like that was like a big like 90s, 2000s story of like hearing about these supermodels, like, oh, they were scouted, like they saw him as a teenager and like next step is success. But she had to manage her family dynamics. She had to manage going to school, not going to school, moving around. Like she had to manage all of that before even becoming what we know of her as Christy Turlington, the supermodel. And not to say even then after that, the many steps she took. She went to college because she had never gone to college. Right. She went to college at the height of her supermodelness. I don't know even know how to describe it. Like when she was so huge and she went in as a regular student. And even that, all of that was even before this big pivot for her of, going through this traumatic birth where she really could have died with the birth of her first child that then led her into the nonprofit advocacy for women.
It's almost like she was called to that place because the way you can hear it in her words and how she explains it. She does it in such the pace is such a loving, caring, compassionate way, as if she's saying, if I can do it, you can do it, and without it really having to say that, but you feel it.
Well, I think that's the important part about telling these stories, honestly, in a podcast format. Because in a written format, in a shorter format, we don't get to really dig in to every one of these details where a listener may be able to grab onto what they're saying and say, yes, I can see myself in that. Yes, I had a really hard time with it. Even yesterday on Mother's Day, there was a whole social media trend of people showing their first picture with their baby. And I was thinking, oh my God, this is so unrealistic. Like everybody is looking like they have blowouts and glamorous and happy. And I was like, oh my God, like in my moment, it was traumatic. And I posted that picture and said, like, this is the real parts. Like, yes, social media is kind of terrible for these things. And I just gave it as an example of being good for showing out and for showing the more transparent part of it. But I think that long form interview does allow for us to have many more opportunities, not just to dig into how the interview subject felt about it, but you can hear their tone. And I think that matters a lot too, for the listener being able to feel where they were and see themselves in that moment.
What's really interesting is the fact that, with her talking about, her traumatic moment, Christy, and because my mother had a special needs child, she never openly talked about the struggles. I do not know about her struggles. And I think that Christy's openness is going to allow other people to say, hey, look, it's not as easy. Those pictures are beautiful of our children, but that journey it wasn't what you think it was.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, good for you for acknowledging that it was both hard for your mother and that you don't know about it because she didn't talk about it. I think it was a different generation. And I think that, people are used to being able to show the really shiny part of their lives and make everything look like they've got it all under control. I think part of that was necessary for women to be able to really enter the workplace that was only built for men in a really serious way, to be able to be taken as seriously as their male counterparts, because they were up against a perception that they were going to be held back by whatever was going on at home. And so I think that it was necessary in that moment for women to be able to show that they were not constrained by whatever was happening personally. I think that now we're in a different moment. I think there's very little good that came out of COVID. But I think that one of the only things is that it kind of opened up our lives. Like everybody was able to see what was going on behind closed doors. And so we were able to reclaim it, to say, yes, this is happening to me and I can still be a good employee. Yes, I have all this chaos at home and I can still show up the way that I need to when I need to. It might look different, but I can still take care of my responsibilities, whether it's on the school board, whether it's in the workplace, whether it's with a play group, and I can still show up and authentically be myself, because now you also know what's going on behind these closed doors.
Yeah, see, that to me is the fascination of life. And I always blame it because I'm getting older in life, so I want to hear everybody's stories, which, I feel like that I'm stalking my podcasts because it's like, oh my God, I got to know more about this person. They tell me more. What else did you go through?
Yeah, I think you and I are in very similar positions where we're always asking people to dig a little bit deeper. I think the only natural thing was for me to start a podcast because I like to ask a lot of very probing personal questions of people as soon as I meet them. And it turns out that was a little aggressive and, like a coffee setting or like a PTA setting. But a podcast, it's perfect.
So have you gone back to ask your mother, Mom, was I that crazy 2-year-old that was always asking, why, Mom, why?
I didn't even need to ask my mother that because I know that I was an extremely difficult child and I was very headstrong, and I've grown up with these stories and I know that I got it from my mother. Like I've grown up with this story about how my mother went to her high school reunion when I was maybe 5 and she was trying to get me to leave and she was trying to show that I was, compliant, which I was not. And I guess a teacher that always kind of had it against her said, Lori, that is exactly the child that you deserve. So I've always known that. And in fact, I also now have the child that I deserve. And everybody knows it. And I'm terrified for her teenage years. She's only 4.
Would you say that the podcast She Pivots is a celebration of bold moves?
I think, yes, we are a celebration of bold moves, but we're also celebrating smaller moves that get us to the next thing. I think that this exists in a lot of contexts where we say, like in a more religious context, people would say, like, God has a plan. He only gives what you can handle. Or we'd say, everything happens for a reason. But I like to go and unpack that along the way and say, what are the things that actually built me up for this opportunity? Like, I would not be able to have been ready for this opportunity when it presented itself to me had I not gone through these personal things, worked in these other jobs. Because something that kind of, I hear a lot, especially, like my kids are pretty young. I hear in like a young mom kind of context is that people feel like the career they had before they had kids was a waste. Like it does not apply right now. They're not in that field. And then it makes me so crazy because you gained so much from that previous career that you can apply to now. And you're still building your skills. They might just be called something different. They might be in a different context, but everything is building you to the moment you're in right now and building you for the next moment. Yeah. You just have to be open to be able to see it that way.
I would love to be a fly on the wall when your interviews come to a conclusion and you're sitting there with them, or even if they're on Zoom, especially with a conversation with Crystal, what it's like for them when the conversation comes to an end, because in that moment they have defragged. They have shared things that they probably haven't talked about in such a long time. And now their open soul is going, okay, I can have new things enter me.
Yeah, well, I love that you asked that. I have to tell you, I've left interviews with a lot of new friends. I've made a lot of friends after having interviewed them. We usually hug. I'd say we hug at the end of all of them. And sometimes we're crying. We have really just talked through the hardest thing they've ever gone through, because if it wasn't the hardest thing, then it wouldn't have been big enough to change their perspective and to change their trajectory. And they trusted me with it. And I feel very honored that they trusted me with it. It's like, I want to make sure that they know they feel safe and they feel good about the fact that they've just opened up in this way. And maybe they actually haven't connected the dots this way before. We actually hear that a lot. I sat with a Holocaust survivor and I held her hand and I looked in her eyes and we cried together as she described seeing her sister being killed in front of her. That's big stuff.
A lot of the listeners don't understand, the interviewer, what we go through in order to get to that point and to have that conversation. Sometimes you feel like the historian, other times you feel like that you're the teacher. I mean, I can't imagine the emotional levels of change that you go through inside 40 minutes.
Well, I mean, thank you for acknowledging that. I mean, I have to acknowledge that this show has taken kind of an emotional toll on me that, once a week, I'm asking people to trust me with the hardest thing they've ever gone through. And I'm empathetic towards them no matter what it is. Like, I really match their emotion. Like, I'm very in it with them in that moment. And it does take a lot out of me sometimes. I think it's worth it. I am honored that they are willing to share their story with me. Like, I really am. And so they deserve that. Like, they deserve to have my utmost attention and focus and emotional bandwidth. But it does, it's not like my emotional bandwidth is limitless. Like, it does end up having to pull from other places in my life. Yeah.
One of the greatest things about listening to your podcast, I think whoever your producer is and whoever is deciding where to put the commercials, it's in the right place, because it gives me a chance to catch my breath, to get myself back together again. And then when we come back from the commercial break, I'm ready to have even more.
Oh, I love hearing that. So my executive producer is on with us right now. She's amazing. And we have a really good team. Like, we've built our team from scratch. I had a smaller political podcast before this, and I worked with a production company, and it was kind of unsatisfying. Like, I couldn't control every piece of it. I think for me, it was a necessary part of the journey because I learned how to make a podcast. I learned how to do all the different pieces. But when I went into this show, it was kind of a slow build because it was really important to me that I owned every piece of it. And I built every piece of it. And then I had the confidence to do it. And so now we have a very small but very mighty team, and we do every piece of the show together. And I totally trust them. Like part of this learning journey along with me, like as I'm learning it, is that we've all learned and built it together. And my executive producer, who's on with us right now, started with me right at the very beginning before there was even a podcast that existed. And we came up with every piece of it together. And so we've learned along the way. And yes, she does an excellent job.
Well, you bring on guests that are just so down to earth, real. And I mean, when it comes to quality journalism, because I think journalism has even changed. And one of your guests was Jo Piazza, who I've been blessed to speak with so many times. And I love the way that she's a true hero in so many listeners' hearts because she brings the story. And there are so many times that I feel like that you're coming from the same vein of creativity.
Jo is a riot. She is so much fun to interview. She is so much fun to talk with. And the thing that I love about her, even more than just being a great interview and a great author, is that she really, truly has been a great champion for me.
Yeah.
She has helped me off camera, offline. She has been in podcasting so many more years than I have and had so much more experience with big networks. And I mean, she even helped me negotiate my contract with iHeart. Like she gave me tips for it.
Yeah.
So finding this community of people, particularly women and particularly moms, who are willing to say, like, I'm done with this kind of old competitive narrative. I'm willing to take everything I've learned and help you with it, has been really one of the most gratifying parts of building this for me, that I'm able to test in real time, like, who are the people who just kind of give lip service to helping you and who really sticks with you and is willing to put themselves in the line for it. And Jo Piazza is definitely one of them. And I appreciate you having me on here.
You know, you talked about the politics that you once did. Pivoting away from that. Come on, politics, that's an addiction. How do you pivot away from that to do what you're doing?
Oh, such a live topic. I still feel it every day. I still have friends who are working at the highest levels of government. Like I have a lot of friends in the White House. And it's really hard for me not to be wistful and feel like I could have been in that job. Like I know I was good enough to have done it. And it's my circumstances that kept me, of having 3 kids in 3 years and moving, like that's what kept me from being able to do this. Like I knew I was good enough. And I didn't get the opportunity. And that part really weighs heavily on me. But the thing that I have to keep in mind is that I wouldn't be able to be having these opportunities, like interviewing Christy Turlington, like joining you guys here in Charlotte, like having fun interviews with Jo Piazza. I interviewed the Vice President of the United States live in front of an audience. I could not have done that had I would have been like the 10th person behind her, I would have been like staffing her like in Veep. I would have been holding her bag for her, which I would have been thrilled to do, to be clear, because those were like my dream jobs. But I get different opportunities now. And the opportunities that I get are that I dropped my kids off right before this, and I wouldn't have been able to do that had I still been working in politics.
How do you handle the naysayers in the way, because even today people go, you podcast, you talk with people that have fame or they're top journalists. Dude, why you? So I'm asking you that question. Why do you think it's you?
I just have to have confidence in myself and just ignore the haters, to be honest. And like this happens all the time, that I know that I'm good at connecting with people. I know that I'm good at having conversations. I know that I'm good at keeping things flowing. And I know that I'm good at keeping my nerve. Part of everything having built to this moment, like I have to believe that for myself too. Part of what I did when I worked in politics, that I spent about a decade on air in cable news. So that is live. That is high pressure. I went on as a Democratic strategist on Fox News for really about a decade, sometimes every day. There is not one easy moment where they are trying to give you a layup. And I kept my cool the whole time. Like, I'm very proud to say that I never had a viral moment in any of that. Well, never viral, because I looked silly, I will say.
I can't imagine where your head is right now with the world of politics, because I mean all over the world. Everything is changing.
Yeah, it's a big time, and that's hard for me to process, certainly, as it is hard for everybody. But I have to remember that I'm doing it in a different way now. Like the way that I used to work was very directly impacting issue campaigns, political campaigns, structures of campaign. Like I was very direct. Now I think about my work as culture change. And so it's not that it's not impactful, but it's impactful in a different way. I'm going to people's heart and souls and the way that they think about themselves and the way that they think about their role. Like if I can get listeners to feel like they can have a little bit of a perspective shift and think, oh, well, I used to think that my career was gone and that I couldn't get out of this slump. And now I think, okay, well, maybe I'm just building myself up to the next thing. And maybe I'm just skill building right now. And maybe I'm just positioning myself to the next thing. That's important. And that does connect directly back into politics. Because people show up to vote and people show up to be engaged at school board level, at local level, when they feel like they deserve to have a voice. And that's important to me, to make sure that all of our listeners, all of these women feel like they are important enough to have a voice. And they can take one step at a time. I'm just starting farther back on the spectrum right now when I think about culture change than where I used to when I was directly working in politics.
Wow. I wish you could see my notes because I wrote down, she is the person at the front desk at a hotel and she's got a key to every room. And that's the way I feel like that you are with people's hearts.
Oh, that's such a sweet analogy. I'm going to make a little pull quote of that. That's so lovely. I have to turn this lens on myself too. Like, what are the things that I feel like I bring? I bring a lot of passion and I work hard. And if the career that is unavailable to me that I cared about so much in politics, like if that's not available to me right now, then where do I change my lens and where do I change my focus? And I change it on culture change. And so in essence, I'm, doing a lot of the same work that I'm helping people advocate for themselves, but just in a different way.
I love it. You got to come back to this show anytime in the future, Emily. The door is always going to be open for you.
Oh, that's so sweet. Thank you so much. I'd love to. I love being on with you. You're a great interviewer.
Excellent. Well, you've just been pivoted on your own show here.
Exactly.
You be brilliant today, okay?
Thank you. You too.